my IDs were correct. The people that you go to would appreciate it a lot instead of saying, what is this? And I'm going to come back and tell you something in Latin. And I can guarantee you you're not going to be able to say it again in 5 seconds. So if you start and you make the effort and come up with a name, first of all, if you do it correctly, you're going to pat yourself on the back and keep doing it. If it's not, then you can ask that person, well, where did they go wrong? What's the difference between, as we were talking earlier, what's the difference between a chanterelle and a Jacqueline? And you can talk about why those differences are. And there's a lot of lookalikes. And one of the things I can tell you is don't use old wives' tales. You know, some things, if it turns a coin, silver coin black, or, you know, all of those things that Grandma used to tell you, they don't work for a lot of things. So this is Christian. These guys are at the ID table, except I'm in here now. So. Let's talk about some common mushrooms around here. So, upper left-hand corner, that is one of my favorite mushrooms. That is porcini, Boletus edulis. Okay, there are actually 2 varieties of Boletus edulis. There's Boletus edulis variety edulis, then there's Boletus edulis variety grand edulis. That means the big ones. And we have grand edulis growing around here. So my personal largest was 5 pounds. I saw a picture of one that was 15 pounds. It was bungee corded to the back of somebody's pickup. Awesome. Okay, that's Boletus edulis. You're going to have to learn where they grow. Don't go into the oak forest for Boletus edulis because they're mycorrhizal with pine. Those are simple things that you pick up, that you'll learn. This guy, there's a whole bag of them right here. This lady has. No, she's hiding them. Did that mushroom go around? Did everybody get to look at their chanterelle? Okay, well, I don't know where it is, but keep at it. You don't need to sacrifice anymore. There's one right here.
It's the same.
Oh, it's the same one. All right, so we can talk about that one more if you want. This one is called a candy cap. Okay, it's a very small mushroom. Can be mixed up with a number of things. But this is the one, when you dry it, smells and tastes like maple syrup. So people put it in their desserts. So any ice cream in there probably has candy cap ice cream. So, and very good. There's amazing things you can do with that mushroom. This one is one I want to spend some time on. We'll do that in a little bit. That's the death cap, Amanita phalloides. All right, it's an invasive. It's not a native species. So back in the 1940s, with the wine industry really catching on in California, they imported cork oak. So corks, are made from the oak tree with big, thick, corky bark, and they brought some of those over here. And the trees did well. The bark was worthless for corks. But they brought this in because it's mycorrhizal with oak trees. Okay? And it found that it loved our local oaks. And it's now, apparently, Monterey was the entry point. And it has gone as far now as Vancouver, Canada, British Columbia. So it's spreading, and it's getting to be less fussy about what tree it associates with. So we have several of them on display, but this is the one that will kill you. It's a nasty way to go. So, like I say, we'll spend some time on that one. Mushrooms are seasonal. So right now we're into, I would say, late fall, winter. These are actually in spring to summer. This is the Prince, Agaricus augustus, that has a strong smell and taste of almonds. And it comes up sometimes in June, the day after it stopped raining. Oyster mushrooms, one of the first mushrooms to show up in the fall. They grow on dead hardwoods, and there's enough moisture as the temperatures are going down in the fall. There's enough moisture that the wood starts absorbing enough moisture. They'll come out before it starts raining. There's a couple of porcini. Just to give you an idea, those are probably maybe 2 pounds. So imagine what a 5-pounder looks like. So I remember seeing a picture of I think it was like maybe a 6-year-old carrying this pounders like that. So they can get huge. The delicious milk cap. Okay, we call it delicious, Lactarius deliciosus. That's a European name. And apparently in Europe it really is delicious. That's why it's named that. But here we have 4 different kinds that look like it, that grow in slightly different habitats, none of which are delicious. So those are all waiting for new names. This one is one of the edible amanitas. So this is one that is prized. It's called cacora in Italian. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Amanita floides. So when we're talking about putting a name on a mushroom, we want to try to get a combination of at least 5 characteristics that define that mushroom. So if somebody keeps track, I'm going to go through the characteristics of this mushroom. So somebody count how many characteristics. I'm going to go through this pretty fast. Cap color, some shade of green to yellow. Stem is white. It has, screw this up. It has, you'll notice, it has this membrane at the bottom. The genus Amanita, when they're young, look like an egg. The entire mushroom is covered with a membrane, call that. And as the stem elongates, it pushes through that membrane, leaves material on the top of the stem, on top of the cap, and at the bottom of the stem. And each one of these, this is called a vulva, and it has different shapes and forms based on what species it is. This one has a sac-like vulva of material, and typically does not have veil remnants on the cap, on the surface of the cap. You'll notice this one does. And that's typical of biological things, that if it's supposed to, sometimes it doesn't. Vice versa. So look for variations. It has what we call a superior ring. That just means it's higher up on the stem. And that is white. The gills are white. The spores are white. Therefore, the gill color does not change with age. So if you would take the genus Agaricus, like the button mushrooms you buy at the store, and you compare a small one that's young, the gills are kind of pinkish color, flesh color. If you take an old one, like an old portobello, the gills are chocolate brown, because the spores are chocolate brown and color the gills. So those are things, that's why different age groups show different things. If the book says the gills are tan, and you only have an old one, the spores could be some other color. So you don't know what the gill color is with the spores in it. Things you have to learn. So how many features is it?
10.
Right? 12. Okay. One feature I didn't mention goes with oaks. Okay? You don't find these in pine trees. They likewise with hardwoods. Okay. So does everyone think they could recognize this in the field? Well, experience. You have a question?
No.
You can do it.
Yeah. I've done that before.
Yeah. So, like everything, you've got to familiarize yourself with it. The more time you spend in the field, the more time you see variations, the more you're going to know. Knowing it's one thing, remembering it's another. So that can be challenging.
So what's the correct answer of the characteristics?
What's the correct answer?
Yeah.
What's the question?
What about the characteristics of the mushroom that you...
Oh, how many?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's why I had somebody count. So, a whole bunch, all right? So, those are the things you look for. Yes?
Would you repeat what you said about on top of the cap, there was no...
Well, if you look through our collection of amanitas, many of them have veil remnants on the cap.
Okay.
Sometimes it can be a patch, sometimes it can be, just white spots or different color spots, things like that. This typically doesn't, but when it does, it is a very thin little whitish area. So,
Thank you.
all right. So now this is more like where we are now. So that is a chanterelle on the left-hand side. So everybody should hopefully have seen a chanterelle by now. So this middle one is name change, even from when this was put together. So this is Tricholoma muralianum, the common matsutake. Matsutake means pine mushroom in Japanese. So this is a mushroom that smells and tastes like cinnamon. You often can smell it and feel it before you see it. Hedgehogs, very rare, not rare, uncommon in the Santa Cruz area. Much more common up north. But you'll notice that this mushroom has spines on the underside of the cap, little teeth that hang down. So that's another way nature has done for having as much surface area to produce spores as possible. So this one, we do have some of these on display. This is actually an incredibly wonderful mushroom. The black trumpets. This also is a wrong name. They found that Craterellus cornucopioides is different in different parts of the world. And California, of course, has its own. So this is now Craterellus calicornucopioides. Rolls off the tongue, right? They're difficult to see. You go out in late afternoon on a cloudy day, and you're looking for black holes in their black ground. So difficult to see.
Are all these edible?
They're edible and incredible. Not edible and forgettable. Okay, this is another one of the edible amanitas, one of my absolute favorites. Amanita villosa, the springtime amanita. This is not a beginner's mushroom because they grow right next to, I've actually found them touching Amanita, what is it? What? Not Phalloides. No, we have our native deadly mushroom, Ocreata. And they grow in the same habitat. They all grow with oaks. And I literally have seen these guys amongst the common ones, and the Ocreata are white that as they get older look like that. And there are these that are more white. So, like I said, this is not a beginner's mushroom. However, if you can identify it, it's really tasty. So this is the mushroom we look for when we go up to the Sierras. Turns out that Miletus it's not Rex Vernus, it's Rex Verus, that's a type. Was only known from the Sierras until maybe about 10 years ago, when several of us were up on UCSC campus and we found a buoy and said, what the heck is this? And we said, God, it looks just like Rex Verus. So we said, okay, we sent it off for DNA testing. Sure enough, the only record ever outside of the Sierra Nevadas is up on UCSC campus. And this is the one that we go for in the wake of forest fires. Okay, that's the one positive thing about all our wildfires that we have in California, is that you can go in and pick morels by the tens of thousands. When they're happening, they can be carpets. I mean, I've picked my basket full in an area half the size of this room. They can be just incredible. Yes?
So, not that anyone should take mushrooms from beautiful downtown Santa Cruz, but let's say downtown Santa Cruz, you find some beautiful mushrooms or San Lorenzo Park. Do they absorb the pollutants?
Yeah. In general, you probably don't want to eat mushrooms from an area that is polluted. You know, if there's a lot of pesticides or herbicides, you know, used in an area.
Or people think?
Well, sure, there's that issue. So, yeah, in general, you want to stay away from an area that you would think would be polluted. So, anyway, we probably have at least 6 or 7 different species of morels, including one that grows on the coast that's different, that has not got a name. So, several years ago, there was a fire south of Monterey, and we went up to, I think we had to be up above 1,800 feet, and looking under the burnt madrones, only under the burnt madrones, we were finding a long, tall, skinny one. It was only about that big around, tall and skinny, and absolutely delicious. The best one I'd ever eaten. So we tried to find out what it was. Didn't know, so we had it sent off to DNA testing. Turns out they're pretty cheap now. And so turned out to be an unknown species. Didn't match anything. So that one needs a name. But, and those were found in our local fires from a couple of years ago, but not in the quantity that we were hoping for. So, yeah.
So why did you eat the mushroom that you couldn't identify?
Well, I knew it was a morel. I could identify a morel when I was 2 years old. That's what I grew up with. I grew up in the Midwest, and back there, if you're a mushroom hunter, that means morels. I was taught that morels are mushrooms, everything else is a toadstool. So, fortunately, I've learned a bit more since then.
Are all the morels edible?
All morels are edible. There is one that you can find locally here that's called the landscape morel. So usually in areas that are mulched, especially with bark, tree bark that comes out of the Sierras, they often have morels growing in them. And they're okay. They're probably the worst of the morels, which is that probably better than the best of some other mushrooms.
So, excuse me, do all the morels have this pitted surface?
Yeah, they all look like this.
They all do, okay.
Yeah. There are a number of false morels, but again, it's like the false chanterelle and the real chanterelle. If you get them side by side, they really don't look like each other. So this is kind of a recap. So dig everything up. I think we've been through this. Make sure you know what habitat it came from. So one of the things that you can use if you're using wax bags or something, if it's growing in pine, just put some pine needles in. There's your reminder. This is important. Is it growing on wood? On wood. If it's growing on wood, you need to know what kind of wood. There's some mushrooms that only grow on conifer, and some mushrooms that only grow on hardwoods. So you need to know that. And if it's growing on the ground, oftentimes it might be growing in buried wood. Important things to know. So you're starting your identification. One of the things you do is you look for staining reactions. Okay? So some mushrooms, when you bruise them, give you a color change. It's an oxidation process. If you get into mycology, there's a whole slew of different chemicals that you put on them and look for color changes. That's more advanced. This is a mushroom. This mushroom over there, Agaricus xanthodermis, means yellow skin. So when you scratch the edge of it, it turns bright yellow very quickly. This one, which is Satan's bogey, poisonous, cut it in half and it turns blue. So that's one of the old wives' tales. And I have an interesting story about it because I was out in the woods picking mushrooms called butterboletes, which are bright yellow and stain blue very quickly. A very good animal. So I was walking one direction, the man was walking towards me, and he had a basket. Oh, great, another mushroom hunter. So I started talking to them, and from his accent, he was clearly from Italy. And he looked in my basket and said, "Oh, don't eat those, they turn blue." And I said, "Well, no, those are butter lilies, they're just fine." "Well, no, don't eat them, they turn blue." But apparently in Italy, that's what they use, that's their guidelines. Don't eat them if they turn blue. Now, we have a similar rough guideline that if your bully turns blue and has red to orange pore surface, don't eat those, because those are typical causes, like this one. So, but turning blue by itself is okay for some mushrooms. Again, old wives' tales and shortcuts can get you in trouble. No, you should really not take a shortcut. Work on getting your mushroom to species correctly. Odor, I use odor a lot. I'm red-green colorblind, so pink spored mushrooms are a mystery to me. I don't see it. So I have no problem asking friends. It's like, what color are these things? But I have a good sense of smell. And so I can smell things that that same person who said, "Yeah, that's red," I couldn't see it, they couldn't smell the smell that I was smelling. So that works. One of the first things you have to do if you're going to use mushrooms demystified is get a spore print. What color are the spores? And they range from pure white through yellows and reds and pinks and browns and tans, purples. You do that by cutting the mushroom stem off under the cap, lay the cap on a piece of white paper or tin foil or ceramic, something where you can see the color of the spores. Now what? Now is when you start working. This is where you're using your books, whatever technique you're going to use. This is where if this were a class, I would have you opening. Again, I use mushrooms demystified, and we'd start through the keys. The dichotomous key, it basically says they're going to ask you two questions. Is the object red, or is the object white? If it's red, you go to a new set of two questions. If it's white, you go to a different one. You keep bouncing back and forth between these couplets, and finally you get to a point where it says, "You have this mushroom." Hopefully you got to the right place. In order to find that out, you have to go read that description. Make sure your mushroom matches. If it doesn't match, don't eat it. There have been instances, one of which I was a part of, where I got a phone call from somebody who obviously was very ill. He couldn't get 3 words out without retching. And I met him he and his girlfriend at the hospital, and he had eaten Amanita floides. They had eaten Amanita floides. And it was the first time I had ever seen abject terror on the young woman's face, because she looked at me and said, "Am I dying?" How do you answer that question? Well, yeah, you're stupid. So the boyfriend was stupid. He was trying to impress a new date. I'm sure she was impressed. So anyway, later, interestingly enough, this man came back a year after this incident and came to me and said, "I would like to address the people at the fair to tell them about what I did." And he did that. He stood up and he said, "I did something really stupid." So what he did, I asked him, I said, "Did you have a field day?" "Oh yeah." I said, "Well, the mushroom you thought you were picking has tan gills with brown spores. The mushroom you ate had white gills with white spores." I said, "Everything matched except for that." That's simple. That's simple. He wanted it to be that mushroom so badly that he just ignored them. Don't do that. It's easy to do. Don't take shortcuts. If your mushroom doesn't match the descriptions given in your references, just stay away from it. If you take away nothing, if you don't absolutely know what it is, there's sure of an answer when you're taking a test. There is a different level of sure when you're going to eat it. Right? You want to be that much more sure. So, anyway, that's pretty much where we are. Yeah, this is a plug for us. You know, we are the Fungus Federation. So that hand was up first. Yes.
E makes all the sense in the world. Do photo apps like C have any value? Would you say?
Do
There's apps.
Yes.
Like Seek is one that.
Using the phone apps for identification, absolutely, but not for eating. Because again, I've seen them be so wrong. You know, one time I said something and they said, "Oh no, you got that wrong." I said, "No, they got that wrong," because I knew what it was. The phone app came back completely wrong. Use it only as a guide. It's like, okay, they say, I mean, when you're just starting, you look at a mushroom, you have no idea what the heck it might be, what genus it is, let alone species. You've got to start somewhere. And if the phone app says you've got Amanita something or Agaricus something, at least you can go there. And once you're able to identify it to genus, which is pretty straightforward, you can do that actually relatively easily, because those characterizations are all done with macroscopic features. And so you can learn those quite simply. And once you go there, getting to species is a lot easier than just starting. So, but if it says you've got a certain thing, go to different other resources and make sure that it is in fact that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, what my question is are there any mushrooms that exist that by cooking that mushroom, like say if it's a poisonous mushroom, does it change that level of toxicity by cooking?
Absolutely.
It does.
One of the common ones, you won't believe this, morels are poisonous.
So now
They cook out. It cooks out.
Yeah.
In fact, some of you may have seen the incident. There was apparently a sushi shop in Montana. What's a sushi shop doing in Montana? That they were serving raw morels. 2 people died and a bunch of people went to the hospital. So, and that is a mushroom that's been known for centuries as a prime edible. But also understand that raw mushrooms are not digestible. They're made from chitin, which is the same thing as crab shells. So it's not digestible. So it's just roughage if you eat it raw. I mean, it's done all the time. Italy serves porcini that way. They serve some of the amanitas that way, you know, but you don't eat a lot of it. So if you ate a whole bunch of raw mushrooms, you would probably get sick. No, taste is merely